we ready?
Yep.
Ready as we're gonna be. All right. Welcome everybody back to Conflict of Leadership Coffee Table Edition. This is episode 3. I'm your host, Tim.
Jeremiah.
And we talk about everything in the fire service, changes, tactics, way we do things, how it affects us, and what it's like for us growing up here in the fire service. So, how are we doing tonight?
Not bad. Can't complain. It was a good day.
Yeah. We Jeremiah and I are the we'll call it the partners in crime of some jokes. We do have a partner who hates horror movies with a passion. So we and we like practical jokes. So
Yes, 100%.
There's a ghost in the station.
Oh, Carl.
So I mean, oh boy. So well, tonight we're gonna be jumping to the deep end. I know I keep on saying that for every single one, and I don't know if there's not a deep end for us, but we're gonna talk about change. So yeah. So we're gonna be talking about our inability to learn new things. So, yeah, you got any opening thoughts on that before we?
Man, I've been around this for a while now, and I've noticed nobody, especially the older ones, hate change. They're against it. Everything about change, unless they absolutely have to and they have no other choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's funny because I almost feel like we're reaching that point where we've learned how to do the job, and we're in that threshold where new techniques, new technologies are going to start coming out, and we're displaced enough from our initial training that it's going to be hard for us to want to change and want to learn new things. So, what's some of the things that have changed just in the time that you've been in? That
when I first started, we were doing paper reports, and then switching over to electronic reports. That was a huge change. I was so against it when it first started because I can write a paper report 5 minutes before we get down the road. It was done. Now it's takes longer. It's more in depth, and even with different operating systems, it's some are even more in depth than ones out there. Like we're switching over to a new one. It's a lot more in depth than what we use now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember my first charts when I worked for a private ambulance company. They were all paper. And I mean, the most envious thing about them was for general transport, I could hand jam that thing out before we got to the hospital.
Oh, absolutely.
Let alone sitting in an EMS room, sitting there like, okay, scribble. For me, I think it's the changing of how we do like what we see as I guess order of operations for tactics, because for some people is RICO RICO RS, our salvage overhaul. It was slicers, and it's gone back and forth between those two. And just like when I went to fire school, it was RICO that was the big thing that was pushed. And then I remember starting at where I'm now full time, my assistant chief asked me after our first day of orientation that, hey, do you know what slicers is? I'm like, no. It's like, cool, you have a homework assignment. You got to go home and figure out what that is. Go watch some YouTube videos or go figure out what this is and how it's different. And I mean, it wasn't a struggle for me to change then, but now kind of thinking back, if somebody had that kind of paradigm switch to me, I'd be like, oh, hold on, I'm not sure if I want to do that.
Right. Again, when I first started off at the fire department and at the private ambulance company I worked for, it was all paper. And then private ambulance company I worked for at the time transitioned over more quickly to electronic reports. That was like 2 days of training that I was miserable in. Like, I like the paper report. Like you said, you can slam those reports out fast. and it was nice. And I got to sit there and hit tab after tab, and type tab after tab. But over time, it got easier. You know, I didn't like that change. I hated it because it was taking me longer to do a report. I'm like, why? This is stupid.
Yeah. You know, so I mean, with that, how long did you try to hold on to those paper run reports before, like, did you in your mind have like a moment where you thought, I can still make this work? Like, the rest of the world is going to digital, but I can make this work.
Man, I had a clipboard full of those carbon copy reports because there was times I would write it all down on my paper report and then I would be done. And after the call, I was one of those persons that sat there in the EMS room, did my entire report on the computer. But over time, I was like, why am I doing this? It's taking me even longer the time it took me to do a report and to do this. I could have been done with the electronic report already. And then that's when it finally clicked. Just
the electronic.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's funny because we do hold on to those things, thinking that like if I keep doing this one thing, it'll either revert back or they'll just leave me alone. I'll be one of those they just leave alone, let do what it is. I mean, I think the rub comes is that just as you realized when we realize it doesn't work.
Yep.
Like that thing that we're just holding on to, and you realize that it actually, especially with the advent of more advanced and more in-depth digital reporting software, paper run reports, honestly, I would be terrified to do a paper run report anymore.
I don't remember the last time I've seen one.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's probably been 10 years.
At least. And I'd be terrified to do one, not because I wouldn't remember how, but because the amount of the spaces, I have a, 8.5 by 14 sheet of paper to write everything on. Now I have as much digital space as I want to document everything, my assessments, my findings, my changes. I can do it all on paper report. I realize now, like, wow, that was really limited. Actually,
it was.
Didn't do what I wanted to do.
And if you run out of space, you have to do an addendum to them too. You know, I'm like, I've had to do one of those. Regretted that.
Well, and that could be problematic too, because doing an addendum to a paper run report for our listeners who have never done a paper run report, you got three pages that you had in your paper run report. The top page was a white page. That was the page that you kept for your official records. The second page was usually a pink or yellow page, and that was the first carbon copy. The third one was the opposite color. And what you would do with those two is that one of them would go to the nurse, and then if you either had a different division you gave your carbon copies to, or, I mean, I know that some of our hospitals still have a box for EMS reports. That's where you would put the other copy. So say if you had to do drug exchange or something like that, you had to put that copy in there. So, but if you had to do an addendum, addendums didn't come in carbon copy form. The ones I remember from my work private ambulance were actually on the back of the.
I think ours were too at the fire department.
Like it was weird because then you have to Xerox copy that, which then that becomes an issue by itself, because technically that's no longer an original. Technically, it's a facsimile of the original. Technically, if somebody really wanted to get a B up their butt, they could say, nope, this doesn't actually fall underneath the run report. No, this actually isn't a part of it. There was a very specific way you had to actually document and put it together that this is on an addendum, and you had to make sure that on that carbon copy, it was annotated that there's an addendum to this CD addendum for continued report. But it can become problematic.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and especially now as a paramedic and dealing and giving narcs and stuff like that, I really think about that. I'm like, man, I'm glad I didn't experience that.
You know, that's another change I've noticed over the years too. And like today, now we're giving more narcotics to patients. Back when I first started, I was like, oh yes, don't give it unless it's absolutely necessary.
I remember abdominal pain was the absolute no for giving, because the doctor might not be able to find out where the abdominal pain is. Never mind, you have MRI scanning and you have CT scanning. Never mind all that. He's like, and that was, I remember. So when I became paramedic, that was not so much on the wayside, but it wasn't it. There's still enough people there who believe that was like one of the warnings you got.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember when I was still basic that, you know, paramedics, when they were telling me going to paramedic school, it's like, yeah, we do this and do this. And it's like, but we will never give narcotics to abdominal pain because you'll mask the symptoms and you'll mask where the pain is. Never mind that when you do the assessment, you feel a giant mass on their abdomen.
Right.
It's like, well, duh, this is obviously the point of pain.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's really far reaching. And again, we thought that those systems and those ways worked.
Yeah. I mean, now today, you take someone with excruciating pain, they're like, well, okay, why didn't you give anything now? And some of those people are the older ones that are like, well, back in my day, we were told not to. You know, so it's like, okay, I'm getting yelled at because I didn't give it, but I was always taught not to. And like you said, because it's going to mask the pain. But again, we still have the MRI, we got CT, we got PET scanning. You know, we have all those tools, and you're not going to utilize them just because I gave some pain meds.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really does bring to light just like not only how much we hate change, but just how much we will hold on to things that we think are, we think that that like we can beat that system, or maybe if we just keep doing it this way, we'll prove that it works.
Yeah,
because unfortunately, I guess depending how you look at it, there is a lot of good reasons to give, say, narcotics. You know, I always joke whenever I'm with somebody that the biggest reason I give narcotics is Pee Wee football because they broke their arm in the middle of their forearm. And that has been like this recurring theme for me. But then we had a couple of years ago, we had somebody who, in order to move them, we had to give them something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because they was the way they had twisted their leg, there was no moving them without, first of all, they were screaming bloody murder, but second of all, it's like that's actually for patient care.
Yeah.
And you know, you kind of think back to like, oh no, don't do it. I mean, all the stuff or narcotics and whatnot. It's like, yeah, but my patient care has to come.
Exactly.
It has to come first. You know, one of the things that always seems to be, I guess, a point of contention is your, like, I guess maybe this is the direction we need to go, is like when it comes to our fireground tactics and how those have changed, because we know the houses are being built different than they were 100 years ago. Heck, they're being built different than they were 50 years ago.
I would even go 20 years ago.
You know, I would agree with you, because 20 years ago, we didn't have nearly as many of these manufactured I-beams in houses as we do now. And the gusset plates and the stud placement and the way that we actually, what's it called? Like the decking for roofs and stuff it wasn't always OSB. It might actually be laminated plywood, like it was back in the old days. So, no, I mean, so why do you think that we hold on to some of these things? Like, we just don't want to change.
Because it worked for them. It's always worked. Mm-hmm. You know, and then especially for someone that's been doing it for so long, and they've been doing whatever it is for so long too, and it's worked for them. And now you're saying, we're not going to do this no more. Mm-hmm. We're going to do it this way. Totally different. You're like, whoa, hold on a second. But this way has always worked. Why are we getting to this point, fixing something that's not broke?
I think for our listeners, if anyone's been paying attention, was it 2012, 2015, somewhere in there, UL did a major study on fire tactics, where they set something like 40 buildings on fire, and they let the fires go through different stages of development. They tried different methods of attack. They tried different methods of attack at different stages of fire development. It's amazing the findings of many of those studies, honestly, at the foundation, should have completely altered how we fight fire. It should have completely altered how we do our operations. Mm-hmm. But then yet, I still run into people who refute those, like, oh, well, that was in a controlled setting, or that was to an extent, yes, right. It was, but fire's not controlled. I mean,
No.
So it's interesting to me that even so we hold on to it. It makes me wonder then, is it so much that it does work and so we should just wait it out? Or is it, as you said, it worked for me in this instance, but that instance was either so specialized or such a niche moment that you either got lucky or you just haven't done enough times for it to fail.
Exactly. You know, like when I first got hired, I was new. I was still learning. I'm still learning. But from what we do now to what we were doing, like there's actually a systematic approach to this now. Back 13 years ago, it was like, get in there.
Yep.
Now it's like, let's read the building, read the smoke, read the fire. You know, and like I said, back then it's just, all right, go, get in. What are you waiting for?
I remember my first structure fire that was here. It was a garage fire, and I was pretty fresh out of fire school. Like within, I'd say about 8 months, give or take. I was fresh. Yeah, I was fresh. Let's just call it what it was. I'd never been in a fire department, never been in a real fire, and so we get called for this garage fire in the middle of the night, and I'm on the first due engine because it's my duty night. So my lieutenant on that night said, "Hey, we're gonna do this. We're gonna pull a 2.5. There's 4 of us on the truck, so 3 of us are gonna take 2.5. One of us is gonna stay back and run the pump." What ended up happening though was the chief at that time arrives on scene, and any idea of doing a semblance of any type of coordinated tactic. Now, let me make it clear that this is not going to be like we're not going inside. But we are protecting the house, and that is all we're really doing at this point. But any type of like coordinated, like, okay, let's get this kind of nozzle set up. Let's get a blitz force out. Let's move or attack. No, it was whoever you saw first or he saw first. Hey, you go do this. And there was no arguing and saying, oh, no, I'm doing no. I told you, you go do this. Chain of command went out. And even years later, I bring up that fire with some of the people who were there. And it's like, well, yeah, but you got to realize it was just a garage fire and, it was just all hands on deck. Well, that's great. But that doesn't work. Maybe in that moment, because it was a total loss, it does work. But that's not going to be repeatable. You can't do that every time. You can't just roll the dice every single time and expect success.
No. There's been times like when I was first hired, still fresh. I was probably only here 3 months, maybe. Had my first structure fire. How we got there, thing was on the ground. I was told to go do this, and then I got told by another officer, "No, you need to go do this." Like, but again, this officer just said to do this. Yeah, he's a captain, and you're just a lieutenant. Now, who do I listen to? Yeah. It's like I don't want to say no because I'm new. Yeah, but I'm like, sorry, but this captain told me I needed to do this. And it's just the whole chain of command. And hey, come on, guys.
Well, and the inability for us to change, like when that's all you've known. And I mean, especially in volunteer type settings, when that's all you know is that every day it could be not just different positions on the truck, but just different, like what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. Like, and at any moment that could be uprooted. That could be really hard to change and have a training and say, hey, let's have some structure. Hey, let's have some actual like chain of command here. Yeah. That could be really difficult to try to implement because you're going to have 8 guys in the back who've been doing this for 25 years. Like, oh, but back in 1984, we did this and we did fine. And, we have hundreds of fires over the last 15 years and no one's gotten hurt and no one's died. And, it's the fire always goes out. It's like, yes. But it's like, you have to ask, were we just getting lucky? Or when you look at those quote unquote hundreds of fires, how many of them were defensive fires that you didn't go interior on anyways? Yeah. And then you're just like, had you gone interior and you had that kind of mentality, somebody could have gotten seriously hurt.
Oh, absolutely. It's like our county's mostly rural.
Yeah.
90% of it's rural.
Yeah.
And at the south end of the county, and when I listen to some of their fires, I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why are we doing it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was stuff when it was taught before me. I'm like, it makes no sense. But those guys are still those volunteer departments.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, they will not change down there.
No.
And that's that. This is what they do. This is what's always worked for them. And they don't want to do something different.
Well, and I hate to say it, and this rings true by anyone who pays attention to NIOSH and the LODDs. Anyone who is familiar with fire code, when you look at the biggest chapters of your fire codes, biggest chapter, your electrical code, building code, when you look at the LODDs and how many pages, the biggest ones have got 40, 50 pages in those reports, you can tell which ones had either the greatest fatalities, the greatest injuries, and then what made the greatest change. And unfortunately, until something catastrophic, death, injury, loss of equipment, like major equipment, not like a Halligan, but like a truck or like a ladder or something like that, generally no one reflects back and says, oh, hey, that was really bad. That was actually, we shouldn't have been doing that in the first place.
Exactly. And it's sad. It takes something like that for them to realize, man, we shouldn't have done it that way, or we should have done something different. And it shouldn't take something like that, an injury or even a fatality, to change your ways. Change your ways before it happens.
Well, so that brings up kind of the second part of the question tonight, is that, do you think we realize it doesn't work and we just kind of ignore it? Or do you think that we honestly truly believe, yeah, I'm doing this every single time, hose line to the front door, every single fire, it has worked, and that's the only way? Do you think that that's purposeful, or and that we just don't know, or do you think that we do know, we just ignore it?
I'm gonna go both.
Okay.
But I'm gonna lean more towards that we do know it, but we're just gonna ignore it because that's what they've done for the past 15 or 25 years. They know you shouldn't be doing that, but they know their way works. Yeah. But then again, that's what they've been doing.
Now, I think it gets muddled up, because I said on the other side, I think that we don't always know, because it is the only way we were taught. Backboards were a big thing.
Oh my gosh.
You know, backboards that habit was so hard to break, because anybody in a car accident got backboarded.
Yep.
Even if they've been walking around for 10 minutes, you have neck pain, you got backboarded.
Backboard, C-collar.
Yep. You know, any type of traumatic injury, football player, backboard. Baseball player got hit in the head. Guess what? Backboard. Yep. It's like, and that was so hard. But it was we didn't realize for so many years. Somebody a long time ago in the 80s, somewhere in there, said, hey, C-spine mobilization is really important. Well, but there's other nerves throughout the back we need to protect. So if they have a C-spine injury, we should probably protect the rest of the back. And we just kind of accepted it. And we, honestly, no one ever really looked any deeper into it till much later, till 20 some odd years later. And then we started knowing, and then people like, well, I don't want to change, because, I mean, what if you're wrong? Yeah. What if I was right? And, you know, we just didn't know. And I mean, so I agree with you where you say it was like, okay, we do know better, but it's easier to do this because we've always done this. But then also it's sometimes we don't know better, and then we do what we know because we don't know any better.
Exactly. Like working in private EMS and the hospital that we service, when we get a trauma transfer, I'm like, why are they on a backboard?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, what do you mean? And like, some of these hospitals don't realize we don't use backboards anymore.
Yeah.
And they're like, what do you mean you don't use them? It's like, they do more harm than good. That's what the study showed. Yeah. So we use them in emergency situation, then we remove the backboard. And they're mind blown. They're like, what? And they like, how do you doctors not know this?
Well, what about the days when also too we used to break every single window on a structure fire?
Yep.
Because we gotta get all the smoke out. And how many structures did we lose within the next 2 minutes after doing that, because we fed tons of oxygen into a fire, or we needlessly broke those windows because it wasn't actually a fire. Somebody just burned their food in the stove because they're that bad of a cook, you know? And that is, again, though, no one when we figured out that, hey, ventilation of a structure fire helps clear out smoke and helps direct heat, we figured it out anecdotally. That is, we figured out like just by trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
The evidence that came and showed later that flow paths are really important.
Yes.
Again, no one really thought of flow paths. No one thinks that open up a door, now have a new flow path, until you can demonstrate it by model. And even then, you're like, oh, well, what about this? You just don't know the science behind it. So you just kind of refute it. You just ignore it.
You do. And like you brought up the whole flow path. I learned a little bit of it when I was in fire school, but I learned more about it when I was out of fire school. And it creates a whole new path when you open up this door or these 3 windows. You're just creating a bigger path for it. That's all you're doing instead of closing it off.
So here comes the question then. So what do you do with that? So whether it's backboards and as you said, you tried to educate, outlying hospitals. They're like, hey, we don't even do this anymore. It's harder whenever it's our constituents, it's our coworkers that we have to have this conversation with. How do we overcome that? Can we overcome it?
We can, yeah.
Okay.
It's hard. I mean, there's times I still catch myself keeping people on backboards, and then at the end, I'm like kicking myself. But why did I keep them on the backboard? But then doctors don't question it either.
No.
But I also know better. But there's times like people just don't want to take the time to remove it. I'm like, okay, we have the time though, but let's just get it out.
Yeah.
We can lay it right here. It's fine. It's not a big deal.
Well, I think you just brought up 2 points. Number one, people don't question it. I mean, how many times have you taken something in and no one questions why?
A lot.
I mean, or you do something in fire scene and no one questions why you did that way or did that thing. And then on the other side is that you did it, and especially in EMS world, you take them in backboards, reeves, sea collar, vacuum splint, doesn't matter. How often do you get that, unless you like fight for it right then and there? How often do you get that piece of equipment back in that 5-10 minutes after you take them in?
Weeks.
Yeah, I mean, and oftentimes it's because another fire department procured it for their own uses.
Yep.
And it found its way home other ways. But I think that's what happens is that we don't question why we do things. So we might see something that's like, hey, maybe we should have done it differently. We don't question and say, hey, let's talk about what we didn't. And then the other side is that it takes work to change, takes work to get that back, takes work to, it's really not worth it.
Yeah. I mean, a good example. Last month, full arrest, trying to get the tarp back from the auto pulse.
Yeah.
I was like pulling good teeth. I'm like, we have plenty of people in this room. Let's get him out. Like, I've asked kindly multiple times. Even the doctor said, hey, let's get this tarp out from under them so they can leave.
Yeah.
And here I am. I'm standing there an hour later. I still don't have it back. And I finally said, enough is enough. I need this equipment back because I cannot leave without it. Because if I leave without it, I'm going to get in trouble and we'll never see it again.
Yeah. No, because it'll get trashed. They will throw it away. And I mean, and that's the thing too, is that sometimes we do get in that stage where it's just easier to let go.
It is.
And I don't know. I guess that's especially for where we are with our 10 years or so, 10 to 15 years experience. It's easier to let go because we can push, but we get a heck of a lot more pushback from those older than us because oftentimes we're told, sit down, shut up. Hey, you actually don't know. Hey, you think you've learned something, but you really haven't. And we just get so much more pushback from it too.
We do. And when I was younger and still new to this, I'd be like, we'll get it. We'll come back.
Yeah.
And then we don't go back out to that place for weeks.
Yeah.
And it's usually one of the hospitals we always go to. And then next thing you know, it's gone.
Yeah.
Like you said, another fire department will acquire it for their own use. It's like a revolving door. They just get passed around.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting how many others have, like, they just allow you to continue that kind of behavior. Like, it's like, you need to make the change, but no one's holding you necessarily accountable to it either. At least until something major happens.
Yeah.
Now, when something major happens, someone gets hurt, a expensive piece of equipment gets broken or lost, then all of a sudden we got to make all the change in the world.
Yes.
But up until that point, I mean, we hold on to this inability to change. We just like, oh, it'll come out in the wash, and we just continue doing those things over and over.
You're right about that. It takes something major or catastrophic, and then now everything has to be changed. The way we do things. It can be something small, it can be something big. It just takes one time. That's it.
Yeah,
one time.
It's one thing I've found that helps the change along is, I don't want to be so cliche as to say being the change, because I get tired of hearing that. Like, be the change you want. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. One person against 8 other people is not going to survive long if that doesn't, if it's not picked up by anyone else. I mean, you can only, I'm sorry, I can only set the monitor up the way I want it to be set up so many times. And yeah, it's my responsibility making sure it's done the way I want it for my shift. But I can only do that so many times before I'm going to inevitably accept, like, okay, apparently the vast majority of people want it done this way, so I'm just going to do it this way because it's what's commonly accepted.
Exactly. And that's what I see is the problem. Even in private EMS, the older ones, like, oh, why are we going to do it this way now when we've been doing it this way for the last 30 years? This way works a lot better. Yeah. Like when I was in EMT school, I was taught Cincinnati stroke. Yeah. And 2 years ago, van stroke assessment comes out. I'm like, I ain't doing that. What's wrong with Cincinnati? I'm not doing it. I'm not changing the way I do things. And I use the van assessment. Like, this works pretty good too. Yeah. And like, it's not every change is bad. No. And and you were bringing up the whole, will be the change. I think you made a valid point. When it's 1 against 8, you're outnumbered. Yeah.
Well, and I think that what happens too is that we do see, and that's actually a really interesting example is the van versus Cincinnati, because they both quintessentially check for the same things: your speech / facial, your grip strength, and your symmetry. They both quintessentially do it, and they do it, but they do it slightly different orders in different ways. One's not necessarily better than the other. However, but they both point to a stroke in different ways at different degrees of success or failure. I think it's difficult is that whenever you have done something for so long, whenever you have to learn a new skill, it's kind of a grinding of gears, if you will, especially whenever you're learning like a new piece of equipment that does the same thing as an old piece of equipment that you're intimately familiar with, and now you look foolish trying to mess with it. Yeah. Like, my department's talking about moving from one type of monitor to another type of monitor. I won't say which ones, and I won't say, but we've used the monitor we've had for a very long time. We've been through several generations of this particular monitor, and the talk has been to move to a different one. That, for me, is terrifying. First of all, because I know of these other monitors. I've messed with them loosely in my time. I'm not intimately familiar with them. So if I have to go run a code on one of them, if I have to pace, if I have to cardiovert, I'm going to look like an idiot. Even though I've been doing this for a while, I'm going to look like a fool sitting there trying like, okay, which one do I do here? Okay, which button do I push? Which dial do I tick? I don't want that change to happen. Even if it would be better for us reporting wise, it would communicate better with our reporting software. It would communicate better with how we do our codes. I don't want to make that change because I'm going to look like an idiot.
Yeah. So you made a good point there. The monitor we use at the fire department, I've been using it since 2010. Yeah. The private ambulance company I work for, totally different brand. And I'm like, never seen one of these before. Don't know how to work it. Don't like it because it's not this monitor. Yep. And like there, some things I still don't know about that monitor. I'm like, oh, I didn't know we could do that on there. I've been there for 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm like, I hate the monitor. It is what it is, but it does the same thing. Yeah. But once you learn it, you're like, okay, this isn't that bad.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because as you said, you hate that particular monitor, and you hate it because you don't take the time to become intimately familiar. You don't have a desire to. You might, and at your level, maybe you don't necessarily have a desperate need to at the moment. Right. But you also, like, there's no need, no desire. So you hate it because you're just not familiar with it. It might actually like be better than what you use at the fire department.
Yeah.
But you don't know because you won't learn it. In the same way as like we get other things like reporting software. That's what we're going through right now. There's a lot of people who are raising their hands, shaking their fists, like, no, let's not do this. Oh, this is stupid. Oh, you're asking me to do so much with this. Yep. It's like, yeah, because you're unfamiliar with it. It feels weird and foreign. But once you get used to it, having used both platforms, you realize the new platform is better. But in that intermediary where you're relearning it, yeah, you are kind of wishing, can we go back to the old one? Can we go back to the way we were doing things? Because I don't feel as stupid.
Exactly. Like, I'm still learning the new reporting system. I'm starting to get more familiar with it. It's starting to get easier and easier. And you made a good point when it's like raising your hands, fist up in the air, like, why are we doing this? This is stupid. Those are the same people that were saying the same thing when we were switching over to electronic PCRs. You know, and those are those people that's been doing paper reports for the last 20 some years. Yeah. And now everything is digital.
Isn't it interesting how that works? That the same ones who refuse to go to the digital reports now don't want to change a digital platform, even though it's still a digital platform. The same ones who went from smoothbore to a fog nozzle, a combination fog nozzle, they fought it until they realized that they have a lot more usability with the combination fog nozzle. And now they don't want to transfer over to anything else, like where you can spit out the tips and put on different tips or anything like that. Isn't it funny how that works?
It is funny. Those are those same people that don't like change. They want to stay where they're at because they're comfortable with it. They don't like getting out of their comfortable zone. That's it.
Yeah, no, actually, that's really blunt, but really good way to put it.
You know, like, I've been out of my comfort zone. Don't like it either. But after I realized, okay, this is why it was done this way. This is why we're doing it this way. And I see the outcome. Okay, now I'm starting to see the picture.
So I'm gonna do a really shameless plug here. I mean, that is the conflict of leadership right there, is it not? That is the conflict that we're talking about. That, hey, I'm gonna run into things that are difficult to make them better and make myself better. I mean, that's the whole thing right there.
Yeah. You know, EMS side and fire side, I've been in both situations. And okay, yeah, I see why we're doing it this way. Yeah. I'm going to start trying to do that way more than I was doing it this way. Yeah. It's going to be hard because I've been doing it this way for so long. That's the hard part, is actually keeping that change going instead of reverting back to the old ways.
You know, this is one way that you really see this. If you get a veteran of the service who's been doing this for a while, you take them from, say, a major state department, so like Tampa, Florida, Dallas, Texas, you know, Seattle, Washington, and you drop them into anywhere USA, small town, and say, hey, yeah, so you've gone from running, 65,000 service calls a year and averaging, 8 fires a week, 10 fires a week, to, hey, now you're going to average a fire every 6 to 8 weeks, and we do 1,800 service calls a year. I mean, that's
a major change.
That's a major change. And
that's a culture shock.
That's, yes. And I mean, and more on that in a different episode for the culture side, but just like relearning everything you thought you knew, like, and just the inability of like wanting to let go. Like, you still want to run stuff like a state department. I can tell you that running calls in a major city is very different than running them out in the country. You can without getting too political or anything, like people treat you different in a city
Yes.
than they do in a country. Like, for example, like when you live out in a rural township somewhere, you know, your neighbor might be a quarter mile plus in either direction. Yep. And you know that if you call for law enforcement, police, or law enforcement, fire, or EMS, you're probably waiting a minute. You're probably waiting upwards 10, 15 minutes from the time you get off the phone with 911, let alone from the time that emergency happened. Yeah. Whereas in the city, generally you're waiting maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on availability.
Right.
But you're not waiting nearly as much. There is a definite difference in the expectation there.
Yes. And it also depends on, are they a true volunteer department? Mm-hmm. Are they part-time? Mm-hmm. Are they part-time, full-time too? And and like you said, are they even available?
Yeah.
They could be on another run, and then I got to call another department in from somewhere else, and that's even longer.
And even then too, I mean, so as you move out to the country from the city, the expectation changes a little bit too of who gets there.
Yeah.
You get out in the middle of rural Wyoming, for example, when you get somebody there, you're probably expecting somebody who's probably a distant neighbor who's also an EMT or an advance or paramedic, whatever state levels of EMS they have out there, who was 25 minutes ago out on his combine doing his fields, or was out on the farm with the cows, and is now going to come in and look like they were that. Whereas if you were in, say, city of Cleveland, when you call 911, you're expecting to see somebody who's wearing some form of a uniform, who looks like they ride on an ambulance or they work a fire truck. Their shirts are tucked in, their hair is nicely kept, they're not wearing the beard.
Yeah, they have the professional world.
Yeah, because it's the expectation of the city. And so you take somebody who's worked in that world and drop them into rural, anywhere town world. I mean, that's that's going to be hard for them to want to change, because they know that what they do works and they're very good at it.
Yep.
But it might not work there. You've gone from having 8 trucks arriving on fire within the first 8 minutes, 10 minutes of your fire, to a truck and a half plus maybe a pickup truck in rural anywhere town, because your closest fire department's 20 minutes away.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big change. It'd be a big change for me if you dropped me to a big city department coming from a small rural town department. You know, I'd be like, oh, this is different.
Yeah. That was so between the two townships I work for, one is a lot more developed than the other. I mean, it's still township. We still got a lot of farmland in my district. But the biggest shock for me going there from where I started the average, even to our closest hospitals, our 2 closest hospitals, is an average of 15 minutes, give or take, driving from anywhere except for really the farthest northeastern part of our township. It's 15 minutes drive. And even then, it's still, depending on traffic, it's 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
That's a long time. Where I work full time, the average drive time to our hospitals is like 6. Like, it's like, I'm,
big difference.
I'm finishing a treatment. I'm looking, I'm like, oh crap. I got about 2 minutes. And I've done that multiple times where it's like, I'm doing in the middle of something, I'm like, oh crap, I got to call a hospital, let them know that we're coming. And we're getting off the exit of the hospital.
Like when I was living down in Southern Ohio, like our closest hospital to us was about 15, 20 minutes. But that's it. That's all we get. Just that one little hospital.
Yeah.
If it's something, like usually sometimes if it's a full arrest or a trauma, we're calling a helicopter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. We don't care if it was a broken arm. Half the time, our chief's like, no, we're just calling a helicopter. They gotta. If we drove them, it's almost an hour drive.
Yeah,
we don't have time for that.
No.
Helicopter's not far from where we were, and they can get up to the hospitals in the big city in 10 minutes, probably less than that.
Well,
but
especially with like your major traumas, and that kind of thing, like an hour. I mean, we don't talk about as much after school, but the golden hour, the time from injury to definitive either surgical or trauma care. I mean, when your drive is an hour long, let's just say you have a car accident and, so now you have like a 20-minute extrication time, and then you have an hour drive time, not to mention the 5 or so minutes you take on scene to make sure they're packaged correctly and you've got things under control. So you're, from the time of injury, and not to mention the time it takes you to get there, you're already at an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes before they're reaching there. That window is definitely closed, closed. You got major trauma, they're dead. So, I mean, and then so then now you have to decide, am I going to change? Am I going to adapt to this new scenario, or am I going to dig my heels in and say, nope, I know better. I know what I'm doing, and just completely try to buck the system. And that's really where we end up, is you have to decide, like, hey, this isn't going to work. I need to change this now versus waiting until something bad happens.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I've been doing this for a while. I still catch myself in my old ways. And then I think about it, it's like, why did I do that? Like, I know better.
Yeah.
I know the right way to do it. But I reverted back to doing it how I was originally taught. That was drilled into me for so long.
Yeah.
And it's like, crap.
Yeah.
Nothing happened, luckily. But again, it takes one time, one little thing, and everything can change.
Yeah. Well, and I think of that too, is that, like, so, especially with newer construction, if you get a basement fire in newer construction and you don't find out or try to definitively figure out, is this a basement fire or not? I mean, all the unprotected timber down there, it burns fast.
Yeah.
These 2x4s we use are not like the original 2x4s that are in my house, for example, built in the 1890s, that are gonna, it's gonna take 15-20 minutes for one to burn through.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kiln dried, so it's bone dry as it is. It's kiln dried. It's missing approximately a third of its actual mass compared to the original stuff. It goes up quick, and
it does.
If we just continue to do our size ups the way we always did, X units on scene, nothing showing us time out investigating. If we just walk around and we just look and we're looking at Division 1, Division 2, we never ask ourselves, do I see any basement windows? Is there basement involvement? Yep. Is the smoke, the smoke, is it telling me that it's coming from the second story window because that's where most of the smoke is? Or is it something really low, like, hey, it's a subdivision fire? If we didn't make those changes, I mean, we'd be putting people over top of fires constantly.
Oh, absolutely.
And but again, though, you have to choose to make that change.
You do. And some people do choose to make that change. Some people, I ain't doing that. It's stupid. It's dumb. Why would I do that? And there's some people like, okay, I'll start trying to change, but I'm not really going to change.
That was actually gonna be my next question. Do you, like, where do you think that really we fall in the partial change?
Where we fall in the partial change, we're in that weird area where we were taught how they were taught back in the day, and now the change in the new stuff today. We're in that middleman where we're kind of stuck in between both. But when we get the new guys coming in, we got to teach them the new ways.
Yeah.
We can't, like, listen, this is what we used to do. We found out this, and that. And this is why we can't do it this way. And this is why we're doing it this way now. And it's up to us to help make that change go forward.
Yeah.
Instead of going backwards. We want to keep going forward and not keep going backwards.
And I would agree, because, and not to be clear, not everything needs to be changed. No. I think sometimes we get this idea, it's like, our inability to change. Okay, we got to change everything. Not everything needs it. But the things that do, yeah, we definitely have to say, hey, this is how we did things. Maybe not the best option. Let's do it this way. One of the things I think, and you brought up, like, new guys and like the new way of doing things that are coming out of the fire academy. It's like, there's nothing wrong. Like, if you're in a training ground and some, 20-year-old kid raises their hand and says, hey, we just did this in fire school, or we learned how to force doors this way. Okay, cool. I've never seen it. Let's see what it is. Let's see how it compares.
Come show us.
Yeah. And one of two things is going to happen. Either A, you're going to learn something, or B, you're going to help them perfect their technique and how they do it, because you're going to be able to see all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is what they're trying to do. Let me help. But either way, you're going to become better at your craft.
Exactly.
I mean, you don't, and sometimes you understand better than too why maybe you do something the old way. You know, I think actually forcible entry is probably one of the most victimized as far as making changes, because there's TikTok videos and YouTube shorts out there ad nauseum to different ways to force a door.
Yeah.
And it's not all of them are winners.
Right.
Not all of them work.
Whole kicking a door in. That kills me. You're just looking for an injury for yourself right there.
It's funny you say that, because I used to carry a sledgehammer with me as part of my kit. And it's a nice Cobalt sledgehammer, not sponsored, but nice Cobalt sledgehammer that I loved. I don't remember where I got it, but I used to keep it with me because I had the idea of like, oh, hey, if we get a residential door, hey, that's a 10-pound mass there, a good old baseball swing right about the doorknob and whatnot. Whew, that's gonna pop that.
Yep.
Couple weeks ago, I was on a structure fire, and it wasn't with a sledgehammer, but it was with a heavy axe. I watched my partner go and thought he was gonna do that thing with the axe. It was 8-pound, 10-pound axe, which is the new style for axes that we're trying to get to because they have more mass. And I heard bam, 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 and he just look at it. He's like jiggling the handle, like it's not popping open. One of the guys from the neighboring department comes up and takes a Halligan, drives spike a Halligan, and pops the door the old way, the old fashioned way that looks like it takes a lot of effort, and it does, because it takes a lot of head effort, mind effort, but it worked immediately.
Yep.
And it's like, that's funny because you watch a TikTok video and you're like, oh man, that worked. Oh man, I'm gonna do that. And then you realize in the real world, no, it really, really doesn't work that well.
Exactly. I remember years ago on a car fire, and a couple days prior, I just watched a YouTube video on a new way on how to get a hood open.
Yep.
Okay, fire's in the engine compartment. Really can't get to it. With the video I watched, you cut a triangle cut, and you just flip the hood open.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no exposures. Let's try it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It worked beautiful. I taught the chief something that day and the other guy something that day.
Yeah.
Where did you learn that? I was like, I found it on a training video.
Yeah.
Because we needed that hood open. Couldn't access because full of fire, but I was able to cut it enough, make that little triangle cut, pull it back with the Halligan, done.
Yeah. What's funny is that how many people I've watched try, especially with newer cars, to take the Halligan and pop a door with the Halligan, like you used to do with like an old Cutlass, or pop the hood of with the Halligan. And I watched them wail on this thing. And funny story, my first training I was with our department, guy and I was with, and so we're both military guys. We're both Army Reserves and National Guard respectively. We bent a forged Halligan because we thought we were gonna be tough, and we were going to pop this door with this Halligan. Like, yeah, that's it. And we didn't do jack to this door. We'd do nothing except bend the Halligan, and then we couldn't put the Halligan back because it was bent. And it's the one that's on it's the one that's on 14. That's the one. If you notice, there's a slight bend in that shaft because we went and bent it.
Never really paid attention to it. Yeah, now I'm going to.
When you look at that, it's like you're like, oh wow, oh yeah, we bent it again though because we thought, oh well, cutters and spreaders they just spread the metal. Well, if I can get just enough force, give me a lever big enough, I can move the world. Except the problem is we didn't take into account that the Halligan was flex, and it wouldn't stay rigid enough. And even if we could get a long enough bar, by the time the bar is strong enough to not flex, we wouldn't be able to move it anyway. Exactly. So, I mean, there's times to change and times we can show where that change is really good.
Absolutely. And you made a good point too. He's like, you got to use your head about it too. I remember, and the guy that used to work with our department years ago. This thing it was called a pig, massive sledgehammer axe.
Yeah.
That was like the biggest thing that came out that year.
Yep.
And he was so proud that he got one. I'm like, he'll never use that here. No. And he didn't. He never used it. And then when he got hired at the bigger department, took it with him. Like, well, yeah, but again, you're not going to use that here.
Again, this is kind of, I guess, almost counter to our point, but one of the tried and true methods of residential forcible entry, the irons, a Halligan and a flathead axe, will 9 out of 10 times defeat a door easier than any other tools you have and do it quicker. Now, will you cause a lot of damage in doing so? Absolutely. You're going to break that door frame or the door, whichever comes first. But you're going to get inside.
Yeah.
You can mess around with all these other tools out there, and you can take your time. You can do nice cuts around the door handle. You can use a what's called K tool, and you can pull out the latching mechanism, and it's like you can do that, and that's great if you don't want to cause damage and say you're going in for like a lift assist or something like that.
Yeah.
But you got a structure fire you got to get in. It's counter to our point about change, but sometimes you don't need to change, and we need to have the ability to say, no, we don't need that change.
Exactly. And I remember, I forget how long ago, probably 3 or 4 months ago, when you were watching those YouTube videos on different ways on how to force the door with the Halligan. I learned a couple things on that. Like, didn't know that. Something different. Something I keep up in here.
Yeah.
Try that next time. If that don't work, all right, just go back to the old way of doing that.
I think too, because and this will probably have to be one of our last points we make here, but when it comes to inability to change, I think inability to change the way we use tools. Whenever I suggest to somebody that there's more than 1 or 2 ways to use a Halligan, I kind of get a weird look, like, well, what do you mean? The adz end and the forks end. That's the only parts we were taught in fire academy. It's like, because those are really easy to teach.
Yeah.
But there's like 6 different ways you could use a Halligan for forcible entry, for force multiplication, that you will not learn in the fire academy. Sometimes our inability to learn is inability how better to utilize our tools.
Yeah. Like, you made a good point there. Like, I think it was probably about a year or 2 ago on a YouTube video on self-rescue of a structure. You got the Halligan, you slam that into the wall and you tie your rope to it. You got a good anchor point to lower yourself down to the ground. I'm like, pretty genius.
Yeah.
There's another way right there.
Is it going to work for like 15 people? No, but in that one moment when you need it and that's your chance, even if it gets me halfway down and then that plaster or that drywall gives way, hey, that's halfway down. 6 feet more less I had to fall.
Exactly. That's better than jumping from a second floor window.
Yeah. Or, this is one that I think they teach you in fire school, but then it gets glossed over. Hydraulic ventilation.
Oh, I almost brought that up earlier too.
It's like, so we get so used to water. Our hose line is used for one thing: put the damn fire out.
Yep.
Yeah, but you can also use it to hydraulically ventilate and clear smoke out of a room and contents.
And it works very well.
Yes. Now, if you have holes everywhere, and it's got to be less effective.
Yeah.
But if you've got one window or one hole and you're pushing out, it works beautifully to clear smoke out so you can see what you're doing, and you don't have to, and contrary to anything else, you don't have to worry about putting the fan out. You should still at some point, but you don't have to worry about doing that and feeding extra oxygen to fire if you haven't found all of it. You're not checked for extension yet, because now you can see that one room you're in. You get an idea much clearer than anything else. But yet, again, using your tools effectively.
Yeah.
That's not something you think about. And if I told somebody that, they look at me as like, what do you mean? That's wasting water. It's like, yeah, but wasting water or being able to see what the hell I'm doing, I'm going to go with plan B.
Right. When you brought that up, I was like, I should bring this up earlier. Like, it doesn't get used very often.
No.
And it's, like you said, it's a great tool to have in the shed because it's very effective. And when people have never seen it work, it's amazing on just how putting water out the window in a fog pattern can draw all that smoke out. You know,
Yeah.
It's been proven, and that's why that hasn't been changed for who knows how long, 30 years.
Yeah. No, but then if it's not something you practice very often and somebody's doing that, I'm sure I would get somebody more senior to me like bang me on the back of the head, like, what are you doing? You're wasting water. What are you doing? Fire was over here. It's like, clearing out our smoke so we can see.
Yeah.
You know, I did this on a barn fire we had last summer because the barn had collapsed. It was a steel building.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember, we had the excavator on one side trying to like clear out debris and whatnot, but all of the fire, there was tons of troughs there where all the animal fat had gone down into. We just couldn't get all the spot fires because it's now covered by a tin roof.
Yeah.
That's 80 feet by 200 feet. So what we did was thinking outside the box. No one would have thought to use tools like this, but it's like, well, this is basically like doing a machinery entrapment or like an actual collapse entrapment, except we're putting the fire out. Hey, go get the spreaders and go bring me all the cribbing we got. And we jacked up that corner probably a good 3 feet, 4 feet to where we could actually get the nozzle in there and we could start hitting all those spot fires.
I remember underneath.
That. It's like, again, I there are people there who's like, what are you doing? You're wasting your time doing that. Like, just hold tight. We're going to figure this out. The fire's already, the building's collapsed, okay? We've saved the other half. We're good. Let's just think methodically about this. And I had a lot of naysayers and a lot of people, hands on their hips, like, oh, I don't know what you're doing. And then it's like, all of a sudden they see, it's like, oh, crap, I can see fire. It's like, yeah, get to it. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, because, we had, at that point in time, we had one excavator there.
Yeah.
And they were doing as much as they could, as quickly as they could. Yep. Yeah, it's the metal roof. Yeah. It's an oven inside of there still. Yeah. What we could see the fire's out, but it's still smoking. I remember coming around the corner. I'm like, what in the heck is this? And I'm looking at it. I'm like, that's genius. It's not outside of the box. Yeah. And people are like, this is stupid. You're wasting your time. Guess what? It worked.
It's not wasting your time if it's not,
and it was effective too.
It's no different what you would do with a building collapse. If that, let's just say that let's say we got a tornado or something like that, and you had workers still in there, and building collapse, they're not able to crawl out. How are you going to get them out? What are you going to do to get them out?
You got to use something. Yeah, you got to start thinking about what tools do I have on this truck?
Because you can't get on top of the roof. Because it's going to collapse in or anything like that. You can't saw through the roof because in the case I just gave here, a tornado, you don't know where they're at. So you might accidentally saw through somebody. And
or there's a gas leak somewhere and now you got these sparks flying and then you got an even bigger problem.
So you're going to use the same tactics. They're interchangeable. Yeah. I mean, again, it's you have to forsake your inability to change for the possibility of having success.
I'm going to bring something up too. You've worked private EMS before. Yep. Discharges to people's homes. Sometimes you have to think out of the box to get these people in their homes. Yes. And I have had to do that multiple times. Like, okay, how are we going to do this? Yeah. Because as well as I do, some of these homes, their hallways, you are not getting a cot down that hallway to turn. Yep. There's no way. I remember last year, a guy said, well, this crew just drug them in on a sheet. Yeah. I'm not dragging this poor guy on a sheet. Yeah. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at the cot. All right, this is going to work. I told him what I was going to do. We're going to pull a cot in. We're going to back it into this room and then forward into the bedroom. He's like, I don't know if it's going to work. The other says it won't fit. I said, I've been doing this for almost 13 years. I guarantee it's going to work. And it worked. And he's like, I'm going to call you for next time. Yeah. I'm like, you got to think about it. Or, getting someone up into a house. Let's see. Weather's crap outside. Their driveway is really crap. You got to think, okay, how are we going to do this effectively but safely? What tools do I have on this ambulance to do this? Yeah. And I see it with new EMTs and even paramedics at my place. They're instantly calling for extra help. Yeah. Like, dude, you have all this stuff. Think about it.
Yeah. You should necessarily discourage calling for help when it's necessary. Yeah. However, that being said, this is, and I tell I tell my fall victims this when they're on the floor and you go to move them. They're like, no, stop. Don't move. Don't move. It's like, you can't live on the floor. We might have to change things in the fly. We might have to get in the, forsake our inability to change because we're the problem solvers. You can't live on my cot. You're doing a home discharge. You're not living in my ambulance. You're going home.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, we have to do it somehow. We can't take you back to the hospital or nursing home or wherever you came from. We're transporting you to the hospital. We can't take you back home. We got to problem solve. We got to figure out how it works. And
at times you have to think outside of that box. Like, all right, let's look what we have and let's think about what we have in our toolbox. You have so many stuff. Either you're on an ambulance, you got multiple tools. You're on an engine, a ladder. You have these tools. Think about it.
We have the technology.
Yes.
We can build them.
Exactly. And there's just so many people that I see, especially new ones, like, oh, we can't do this. We don't know how to do this. And then you get the ones that have been doing this for a while, 5, 10, 15 years, like, oh, done this before. This is watch this.
Yeah.
And then they're like, how'd you do that?
We're almost ending on like it's now we've gone from a change of tactics or strategies to a change of paradigm of thinking that whether you're old or new, like you got to change your entire way you look at the world. When you're old, you change the way you look at equipment. It's like, oh, hey, that was meant for this, but it'll also work really well for this. And when you're new, you don't know what all the abilities of things are. Yeah. And you're constantly changing how you see things. You're constantly changing how you think everything works.
Yep.
Well, you have any last minute thoughts or any last minute takeaways here?
Don't be afraid of change. And change is not always bad. Change can be very good. But when change happens, give it a chance.
Yeah.
Don't shoot it down. Just listen, learn it, and just try your best.
Yeah. And I think I would add on to that. Don't be afraid of changing the way you use what you already have. Yeah. Sometimes change doesn't mean I have to scrap what I have. It might mean I use it differently, or here's a concept, use it correctly. But don't be afraid to relearn how to use something or use something a little different, because we're problem solvers. It is both our greatest weakness and greatest strength. We are problem solvers. That's especially when it comes to our inability to change. That's all we got to defeat that.
You're exactly. And at times we can be our worst enemies and our worst critics.
Absolutely. So, well, thanks everyone for joining us on this episode of Conflict of Leadership, Coffee Table Edition. I've been Tim.
Jeremiah.
And we will see you next week. I don't think we ever really figured out what we're going to talk about beforehand. So
no, we'll figure it out.
It's going to be, lottery for y'all. But if you like what you're listening to, like our Facebook, or not Facebook, not on Facebook. Who's on Facebook anymore? Like our YouTube page. Like us on Spotify. Leave us a comment. Tell us some of the ways that you've had to either change, or ways that you've been resistant to change, even when it's inevitable, and whether it was good or bad.
Yeah. Give us some feedback.
Yeah. So, and for all those, I think I looked at it the other day, it's 11 or 12 are listening to us. Please keep listening to us. Tell your friends to listen to us. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. So, and week by week, sound's just getting better. Maybe the conversation isn't, but sound is at least. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. Until next week, we'll be back.